Esther chapter 2 is where we're going to start, where we're going to be. Lesson 3 of our study through the book of Esther. We've already looked at the setup of the book, basically. We got to meet the king, who we've been calling Xerxes for the reasons I've stated before. Mainly, it's easier to say. We looked at the setup of the queen not being the queen anymore. And when there's no queen, naturally the next place to go is, in the kingdom, is get a new one. Need a new queen. The queen has been deposed. Now they are going to replace Queen Vashti. And as we've already pointed out, that is the point of the first chapter of the book, is setting up Esther coming into the picture, coming into the story to begin with. This is all leading, all leading up to that. How the young woman named Esther, whom after whom the book is named, has anything to do with the book. After the replacement or the exile, the banishment of the queen of Persia. I don't think we really have to get into much of what happened since we looked at it last week, but she refused the command of the king. King didn't like that too much, made him look, at least probably look foolish, humiliated him, and he wasn't going to stand for that. And his brilliant wise men came up with the way for him to get away with punishing her by banishing her from the kingdom. So now it's time for the queen to be replaced. And the way they did it was, honestly, seems very strange to our culture, in our ways, at least to an extent. But we read in chapter 2, just to see the first few verses here. It says, after these things, after all that stuff that happened, the big banquet that lasted for so long, and then that extra banquet, and the queen doing what she did, and the king being so mad about it, after all that and the anger of King Xerxes had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's young men who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king. And let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa the citadel, under custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given to them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. So this was the I don't know if this was the normal way they did it, or if the language suggests that this is not the typical thing, but this was something that these men came up with. Whatever it is, it may just be that they waited until the best time, which was when he wasn't so hot about everything that had happened before, when he had calmed down a bit, maybe when he had when it was a good time. I've already mentioned that during this time period of the book of Esther is the same general period that a lot of the secular history involved in this with this king happened. Some very notorious and infamous historical events with the Battle of Thermopylae and things like that. In fact, it is estimated that there's about 4 to 5 years between Esther 1:22 and Esther 2:1. And during that time was that famous Battle of Thermopylae, if that estimation is correct anyway. So it makes sense that there would be such a gap, because the king was kind of busy trying to take over even more of the world, I guess, or standing up to these smaller nations that were doing to him exactly what Vashti had done and refused to fall in line with whatever he wanted. So, after that period, or when there was a break in that period and the other things of his busy schedule, they said, hey, here's what we can do. We need a new queen, so we'll gather all kinds of beautiful young virgins through the whole kingdom. And the one you like the best, she'll be the new queen. How about that? King said, all right. Now, very simple and to the point. Said it pleased the king. That could go anywhere from he thought it was the greatest idea that he's ever heard to, yeah, whatever, just, yeah, do it. We'll crown a new queen. But you can see where this is going. Even if you've never read the book of Esther or don't know what's going to happen, the stage is being set. Queen deposed. The idea proposed to crown a new queen. We need a new queen. Here's the idea, beautiful young virgins, whichever one pleases him the most. Now, this is where we read or meet arguably the second, I guess I'm hesitant to call him that, the second most important or main character in the book in this historical account. It says, there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. Now, what does this guy have to do with anything? Why is this being brought up? Well, because of what we learn in the next couple of verses. By the way, the fact that he was a Benjaminite, and especially seems to be linked to Kish. Anybody remember who Kish is? Well, I'll give you a hint. He had some donkeys one time, got lost. He told his son to go find the donkeys. And his son ran into Samuel instead. And he told him, you're going to be king, basically. Yeah. Saul, assuming that's the same Kish, as it believed to be. But he was a Benjaminite. Just file that in the back of your mind. Now, here's why he's important in this account, this man. He was bringing up Hadassah. Okay, well, who in the world is that? That is the name for Esther. He was bringing her up. He was raising her. The daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. That's why he's important in this. He is basically the foster father, the guardian, I guess what we might call the legal guardian of Esther. This is now we read of Esther in the text. Esther, after whom the book is named, is now officially referenced in this account. And her cousin, uncle, father, man, guardian, Mordecai. We learn something else about her. It's a little hint. She was beautiful. Well, that should ring some bells, considering 3 verses ago we just read that, hey, let's gather many beautiful young virgins. Well, Esther happened to be beautiful. And you can probably guess what was going to happen. Okay, that's the end of that section. I thought we had some more to read. Different texts vary a little bit in verse 7. I meant to make a note of some of the other versions, and I forgot to do that. Yeah. You know, we don't have any, at least in the Old Testament, we don't have any record of how Vashti became the queen. But very likely, very possible, at least plausible, it was not too different of a process. Maybe not young virgins, but clearly she was lovely to look, very beautiful to look upon, and that was based on this process, probably a lot of the reason why she was the queen for however long she was. So yeah, that hard to miss a connection there. Kings like beautiful queens. So in verse 7 there, some of the older versions say she was fair and beautiful. It just struck me, the language of the English Standard Version. I'm not sure. I don't know the translators personally, so I can't ask them what the thought process was there. But whenever you read the words "beautiful figure," I don't know. It just sounds strange to read that in the Bible anyway. Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I don't recall at least that there's any number given of how many virgins, and it doesn't really tell us how exactly they came to the city. You know, it may be that, seems more likely to me and more practical that they would send word out, and it may be that there were many fathers. Some fathers may have been thrilled to do that, send their daughter. I mean, I wouldn't if I was one of them, but some of them may have. And one thing we know for certain, or we can assume for certain, is that probably not very many of the young virgins would have been crazy about it, especially if they knew who this guy was. Learn a little bit about him, not just for what happened to the last queen, because that wasn't that bad, to be honest. I think she got the better end of that deal, to be frank. But you know, he had a reputations of, we've talked about it. Just remember the whip spanking the sea, okay? Spanking the ocean. Just remember that. He did that. Not the best guy that you would want. But, you know, for many fathers, maybe the prospect of his daughter being the queen of Persia might have a nice ring and appeal to it. I don't know. That seems easier to me than how long it would take to send men from the king to go around all this whole place and find, and then they would have to, you know, define beautiful, you know, rather than people sending their daughters there, or maybe lower officials taking them, and then they would sort of filter through and decide probably further which ones they think are worthy of even beginning the process. And just like any kind of contest, because that's basically what this is, contest at the end of the day. And I'm sure there were teams of people who did some judging in the contest long before the king was ever going to even see them. We know that he was not going to see them for at least a year. So Esther, this young Jewish, it doesn't just come out and say she was a Jewess, but it says who her next of kin at this point, who was a Benjaminite, which suggests obviously that her parents were Israelites, which means she is an Israelite. She's a Jewish woman, a young Jewish lady. That is also very important in this whole history as it unfolds. It's not just about Esther. It's about who Esther is and who her people are, and the whole background and what's going to unfold in this. I also want to point out that we should not take this book to be an allegory or a metaphor for the general trials of Israel. As some, I haven't read any commentaries that do that, but I could see how they could, because, you know, just because an actual event preaches on its own like this doesn't mean it was made up as a story to be that, to be a lesson. Just like Jonah. Jesus referred to Jonah as if he was a real man who actually, that happened to him. Same thing with Job. Esther, we shouldn't see it any differently. But I say that sort of to preface the fact that learning that Mordecai was a son of Kish, a descendant of Kish, a Benjaminite, which means he was in the line of, Saul, that connection to Saul, is going to be extremely important, not in an allegorical sense or as connect the dots and you see the hidden meaning, but just as an interesting and I think more than coincidental fact because of who the main villain in this book is going to turn out to be and what people he came from. So just again, follow that in the back of your mind, but we should be careful not to fall into the trap of this whole story. None of this actually happened. This is just some sort of Jewish parable, so to speak, because we have no reason to believe that. Now, Mordecai, we've met Mordecai now, we've met Esther, we've met Xerxes. Basically, the only main character we haven't met is number one villain, which he will come up later. So, surprise, surprise. Beginning in verse 8, it says, "So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa the citadel in custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. And he quickly provided her with cosmetics and her portion of food and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem." Well, that don't sound fair, does it? Who might I say? I don't know what this guy had the authority or ability to do on his own. I bet some of the other young women weren't crazy about it, or maybe they were. The thing that is left unmentioned, and I'm sure there's historical testimony that could be valuable in determining this, is what happens to the losers. That maybe is the darker side of this whole thing that we may not want to know. It may be that their lives will be ruined, as seems to be suggested in maybe one of the quotes in our booklet. But what's that?
Stated that they were assigned perpetual widowhood.
Okay, so
Part of the king's harem. In other words, you'd be second place, maybe 15th place, but you didn't get the.
You didn't get anything, but it may be more of a, even though you weren't chosen, you're considered tainted. At least you don't have the ability to, go back and everything go back to normal. And okay, well, I didn't get the king, but I can get me a good man to be my husband. Maybe that wasn't the case. It's just not specified in the text itself. Yep. Yep.
In those cases, Joseph found favor and made whoever was over.
Yep.
And here we see that no matter how beautiful she was, God had chosen the individual, and she had favor, he did not. Now, we just see that God, in these situations where God has chosen evil men that we would probably never choose to do that, but he did. He chose, like they want evil persons to king to pick Esther as his future.
Yeah. There are things unfolding in this, and we already talked about the significance of the fact that Esther's the only book of the Bible that doesn't have God's never mentioned by name or, by the word God in any form. And again, I believe that was all by the design of the Holy Spirit. There's a purpose. God is, there are already things. And here's the amazing thing about God's providence is you just cannot, it's like a rabbit hole that you can't ever, it's a bottomless pit. Where does it start? We already see here, one of the single preliminary requirement, well, two, you had to be, three, young, virgin, beautiful. All three of these. Now, I don't know exactly what young meant, probably way younger than we would we'd be comfortable thinking about, but at any rate, Esther was, at some point in her life, going to be young. You can't get around that. At some point in her life, she's going to be a virgin. She may not have been beautiful, though. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, sure, but there were beholders that had to choose if she's beautiful or not. Maybe God did something there too. You never know.
Is there anything that you have found in the Bible anywhere would indicate a definition of what a figure was at that point in history, in that place, in the world, geographically? You see, a beautiful figure, what is defined as a beautiful figure is very different in lots of places in this world.
That is true.
Sometimes it's big and fat. Sometimes it's skinny as a dickens. Sometimes it's big breasts and sometimes it's little breasts. All of those things, have you ever, what was a beautiful figure at that point in history in that place on this planet?
It might be a weird translation, what it says, the other ones don't say figure.
Well, the word is, in the simplest way, I would just take out the word figure, to be honest. Figure, that's why I said, when you read in English a beautiful figure, the first thing you think about is the way we would use the word figure, which is unequivocally a reference to neck down, pretty much. That's what the figure is. But that's not what this word is referring to. It may have included that. I don't know. I wouldn't even go that far. But it doesn't mean what we would use that expression. Somebody has a good figure is not what this is saying. It just is more generally, she was beautiful. She was whatever the cultural standard of beauty is irrelevant, really, because she was in the culture she was in the place of the world she was in. And so whatever the cultural standard of beauty was, she fit it. She was in that, within that standard. And that's what we're reading here. But you're right, standards of beauty are different based on style, based on, looks themselves. But whatever their standard of beauty was, she was that. And I wouldn't even put it off the table that God had a hand in that part too, because God is at work to make, God sees all, and that doesn't just mean everywhere on the earth, but He knows what's going to happen in the future. And He knows that on this occasion, 4 to 5 years earlier, the queen of Persia will be deposed. And, this is why I say you just can't get to the bottom of it, because God's providence is so amazing. Like, maybe He even had something to do with the thing that happened to get Vashti out of there. Where does it start? And like Dean mentioned, as soon as I read the words, the young woman pleased him and won his favor, Joseph's the first person that I think of. Because Joseph, a very similar situation as far as, the basic linear line of where he went. He was a Hebrew, here he goes, or a son of Jacob, whatever you want to call it. He was sent to this strange land, and everywhere he went, whether it was in the prison or whether it was in the king's house, he won favor. And Unlike Esther, the book of Esther, the book of Genesis tells us explicitly who's responsible for that, and that's God. So if God did it for Joseph, I don't think there's any doubt God's the one doing it for Esther, because it gave her an advantage. Whether you want to call it fair or not, like some of the other people may have called it unfair, God's at work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Another place that word is used, speaking of Joseph, the word that's translated in the English Standard Version, beautiful figure, is also used of Joseph in Genesis 39, except it doesn't say Joseph had a beautiful figure. Even in the English Standard Version, it says he was handsome in form, which again, form, figure, but some of the other versions just say he was comely. He was, the old King James says he was goodly. Definitely not a word we normally use. Some versions say he was well built. It just, head to toe. If you want to use an expression, like one of these versions says, I just noticed it, it said he was very beautiful in form and face. Head to toe, beauty. Whatever that meant to them, like Ken said, standards are different, but same was true of Esther. She was simply beautiful, which is going to, in itself, give her an advantage in this contest. So, not only did she just win the favor of this man who was sort of the head dog in this whole situation, he had charge of the women. He really helped her out, and he didn't just like her the most, and did subtle things to try to maybe give her tips, or the king likes this, or don't do this and don't do that. He gave her the best young women to wait on her or whatever, to help her, assist her. He provided her with everything, advanced her to the best place. It's just, that is exactly what happened with Joseph. Joseph goes to prison unjustly. Guess what? All of a sudden he's headed to prison. God working in those less than ideal circumstances to bring about something much bigger.
Oftentimes nowadays, still yet, folks are begging God for miracles.
Mm-hmm.
It would seem to me it would be far better for all of us to beg God for His providential care. We have a much more difficult time explaining God's providential care than we do His miracles.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, God decided, Jesus said this was going to live. They were dead, but He decided this was going to live. Well, all of these things, as we come up to Joseph is a mirror figure of Esther, and God lines all of these things up, and we get tempted so often to leave out God's providential care. I relayed this story with some just last night. I've got a friend that when he and his wife were younger, they went into business on their own. They began their own business, and early on, it was gangbusters. And then all of a sudden, these companies that they had lined up to be in this business and work with them, they one by one faded away, and there they were, just on hold. They had planned their hold, and he said, when all those things occurred, I thought, now what have I done? Why is this happening? And he says, now all these years later, he said, I look back at that, and God helped me to empathize more with folks who struggled, not because of their own doings. God helped me to be a better helper of folks who were trying to get past that kind of thing. He said, I can see that now.
Mm-hmm.
But when it was occurring, he said, I couldn't see that.
Yep.
Maybe and possibly, for sure. The passage that
Yeah.
Whatever happens, we're going to be thankful. Puts us back into this situation like Esther.
Yep, and Esther was right there in that situation with the, can't see it at the time. Mordecai was the one with the more, he was obviously quite older, and he was a little bit on the outside of, not right in the middle like Esther was, but he's the one that presented, who knows? Maybe there's something bigger going on here. Maybe you've come to the kingdom for just this time, and from his perspective, it was a who knows, but from my perspective, I think he was spot on. He figured it out. He was exactly right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Say maybe that she just stood out among the other virgins, and you put his face in that. He walked in the room, and he left the room. Somebody's presence is just wow. Look at that person.
Yeah. Yep. And what happens next here? Let's see. Yeah.
Would you agree then, it shows my lack of education in this area, but if we can find artwork from that time in history, in that location, that was preserved and considered super duper, then that would show you what a beautiful woman that had a good figure looked like and was defined as at that point in history in that place. So we could say that Esther looked like that, whatever we find. Now, surely and undoubtedly, on this planet today, we can find such a piece of art that somebody sculptured out of stone or somebody painted or something that says beautiful here.
Yeah.
Because somebody certainly could come to the United States today and do that to what a beautiful woman looks like in this country at this point in history, and that is greatly different than what somebody in China.
Yes, but like I said, it doesn't matter what they look. It doesn't matter what she looked like, and it doesn't matter what their standard of beauty was, because she was it. That whatever. I don't need to know what she looked like. In fact, if God could give us just a picture of Esther right now that should pop up on the screen, I can probably tell you what I would think she looked like. She probably looked like a kid, is what I would think. Because, like I said, she was probably a lot younger than we would be comfortable to think about, because that is just the way it was back then, and it still is probably in some parts of the world. It's just unthinkable to us that as soon as a young lady biologically becomes a woman, she's ready to be shipped off to a man somewhere, probably a grown man. That's a horrendous thought to us. Any of us that have daughters around that age, or ever had daughters or know girls that age. But the point is, whatever their cultural standard of beauty was, Esther was that, and even more so than average. She fit that mold. So I can close my eyes and imagine what a beautiful woman looks like to me. And as far as understanding the story goes, that is what Esther looked like. Because that's the point, is that she was beautiful. Whatever beautiful means, that's what she looked like. So what she actually looked like is not really the point. The point is that she was beautiful in the eyes and according to the cultural standard of that period and time, whatever beautiful is. So verse 8 then tells us, Esther did not make known who she was, what she was, her background. Why? Because her guardian, basically her father, for all intents and purposes, told her not to. Now, this comes out of nowhere, really. because we have no indication of, there's no build-up that says that it was dangerous to be a Jew at that time. There's nothing that says people didn't like them that much. There's nothing that says it was a rough time for them. A lot of that has ended. We talked about this is after the captivity. This is after the returns to Jerusalem. Esther is among those, and Mordecai among those who remained in the Persian country. But there's no indication that there's any ill will toward these people or anything. But for some reason, Mordecai tells her, do not tell them that you are a Hebrew or a Jew. Do not tell them. Don't make it known. Simple as that. We're not given any explanation, even into his thought process. But he obviously had some reason to think that this was important. Whether it's just because it may be something as serious as that'll disqualify you and put you in danger, or something as small as it will give you a disadvantage in the contest. Whatever it was, he thought it was important, and we're told that this explicit detail, for all the lack of details that were given overall, one of those details that we are given is that she was told and adhered to not telling them that she was a Jew, not making known her people or kindred. So that is sort of foreshadowing, I think, of what's to come, because in not too long a time, it is going to be very important. But that is not related necessarily to the people, but because, just to spoil it, I guess, Haman, the main villain, did not hate the Jews because he hated the Jews. He hated the Jews because Mordecai was a Jew. It all stemmed back to Mordecai, to him. It wasn't because everybody hated these Hebrew people already, but because who is this guy? Oh, he's a Jew? Well, then I'll teach him a lesson. I'm going to exterminate the Jews. Dean, did you have something? Okay. So, every day, it says Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. I love that little tidbit. Totally irrelevant to everything. Totally what some people might call a pointless detail. And yet, it's one of the most relatable and human things mentioned in the whole account to me, because that's exactly what I would expect a man like him to be doing. Every day, he's hanging around. He wants to know how things are going. Doesn't tell us how he got the information, but whether he got to see her or he probably just got rumors and caught word from. He hung out in the place where people talk about things. Today it's the beauty shop, the barber shop. Back then it was the gate, the court, what is it called? The court. Of course, he's out in the court of where the women were, but he's catching word. Just like a father figure, a motherly figure, that's exactly what you would do. I also want to point out, we already kind of alluded to it, but this probably was not the most pleasant experience for these women, not just because they were, assuming that they may have been forcibly, and probably were in many cases forcibly, taken from their families, taken from their homes, whether they wanted to or not. Maybe that wasn't the case, but it seems likely that it probably was, at least in some instances. And then, as it's pointed out, the process is going to be like a year long. It's going to be a long process before they even get to see the king. And, people talk about how men are so competitive. Well, women can be pretty competitive too. And I don't know if any of that would play a role in this, but I just don't see this being the most fun year to experience. But Esther had an advantage by having God on her side. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would not at all be surprised that played a part. Of course, it would be after this whole year and everything. You know, sometimes there are some Bible accounts, not just like of this kind, but, you know, in the book of Judges, there's some pretty dark stuff that went on. And, you know, when we translate it into a kid-friendly version, you know, we have ways of leaving out maybe the more graphic details for the benefit of getting the same story and point across, but not mentioning some of the less pleasant things that we may not want a child to be hearing. It may be that the writer of the book of Esther, again by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, did a similar thing, just not getting into those kinds of things, and that's why it's not explicitly told if that was a part of it, although it makes total sense that it would. But I don't know. I don't know how that would work with it puts a lot of these women, especially women like Esther, in a morally binding situation, because, you know, that's, you know, there's issues there. But again, none of that is the point. The point is, whatever the process was, Esther is clearly already the front runner as far as the narrative is concerned, and we can see where this is headed. Yeah, Dean?
This could be the possibility that he wanted a virgin at the time that he told her. Maybe not. But we don't know, the record doesn't really show it. But I think that's according to God's promise. Kind of him, the way he deals with, you know, things about premarital and stuff like that. I would think that he would, if he was in control, he would at least prevent.
Yeah. That's another possibility. It could be. God. It was well within God's ability to, as soon as Esther walked in, the king, something could have come over him and be like, we don't even need to go any farther. Tell the other women to go home. I mean, that is not altogether impossible. That very well could be the case. One last thing to point out, just on the subject of God's providence and what this is all about. Esther, we already learned she was an Israelite, she was a Jew, she was a Hebrew. Is this whole thing just about the Jews? It's a very important story to the Jews. It's a very important historical event because, as we learn at the end, a whole feast of the Jews was instigated or implemented based on this, instituted. But is it just the Jews? Well, the same, again, going back to Joseph, same question could be asked. When Joseph, at the end, when he revealed himself to his brothers, he told them, don't be mad at yourselves. Don't, quit beating yourselves up. God did all this. He did all this to save a people. In other words, if you hadn't sold me to slavery, I wouldn't have come here. And if I hadn't come here, then this nation would not be able to, you would not be here. And then looking forward more into the history or the future, God basically built the nation of Israel in Egypt. And the way Joseph put it was to save a people. He did this. It wasn't about Joseph. It wasn't about his brothers. It was about something bigger. Well, with Esther, yes, it's about Esther. It's called Esther. Yes, Esther is arguably the main character, but it's not about Esther. It's not about Mordecai. It's not even about the Jews. Because ultimately, why was God working so hard to preserve the Jewish people from extinction? Because somebody was going to come from those people. And you know his name. So it's not wow, look how much God loved the Jews. He did all this because He loves the nation of Israel so much? No. Sure He did, as far as that goes. But He had a plan. The Savior of the world was to come through these people. And if Haman's plot succeeded, God's plan is ruined. Just like if the devil's plan succeeded in the wilderness or in Herod the Great killing the children of Bethlehem, God's plan is ruined. God's not going to let God's plan get ruined. And that is what is happening here. God is working behind the scenes, and not just behind the scenes, but before the scenes, to make sure that His plan is brought about in exactly the way that He intends it to be, which ultimately is the Messiah being born. And He was going to come from the same people that Esther and Mordecai came from. So don't lose sight of that. That is what God is preventing. Not just the extinction of the Hebrews, but what the extinction of the Hebrews, premature extinction, would mean, which is no Messiah. That's what God is working to bring about. It has nothing to do simply with the Hebrews as a people in the sense of, well, today we can look at it and see how much He still loves them. No. There's something way bigger than the Hebrews going on.
The book pointed out that Esther's behavior impressed everyone she was around.
Yes.
We individually need to be careful of our behavior with waitresses, with store clerks, our neighbors, with everyone we come in contact with. Because our body language, our speech, will either discourage people or encourage people.
Yeah.
So it's a personal responsibility to fulfill the God's will in our life.
Glad you pointed that out. Sure, Esther was beautiful, and that may have been that was what got her in this situation or in this contest. But the people around her deal with beautiful women all the time. So being beautiful ain't going to impress them. But I'll tell you what did impress them is her heart and her attitude and her spirit and her behavior. Definitely never can underestimate